This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. After experiencing trauma, I went to therapy, and my therapist guided me through a difficult time in my life. They helped me understand what was happening and provided me with tools to cope and find my own strength and resilience. Their experience and compassion were invaluable and enabled me to rebuild my life and move forward. I strongly believe in the power of therapy to help people through difficult times. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. First, you go to their site. You can use my link, betterhelp.com/resilience. You answer a few questions, and BetterHelp will match you to a professional who has years of experience helping people with struggles just like yours. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/resilience or choose podcast, then notes on resilience during sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month.
I think trauma can be annihilating. It shatters your sense of yourself and your sense of yourself in the world. Now I'm alone in this. And sometimes we're protecting people. I don't want you to know what I know. I don't want you to know what I feel. I don't want you to think what I, see what I saw. I know that factor for me being a mother also was like, I need to be strong. I'm resilient. I got this. Like, nothing bothers me. And then I had my little silo where I dealt with my stuff.
Hello, and welcome to Notes on Resilience. I'm your host, Manya Chilinsky. Welcome to episode number 1 of a 5-part series, Resilient Hearts, Navigating Emotions After Tragedy. Today's episode is guilt, and my guest is Amy O'Neill. She's a licensed professional counselor and a steering committee member for the National Mass Violence and Victimization Resource Center and a survivor of the Boston Marathon bombing. She blends lived experience and learned and professional experience. And we had the most amazing conversation about the concept of guilt and how it can be overwhelming for some people, and for others, it can give us the energy to seek the help and support that we need. I think you're going to learn a lot in this episode. And if you like Notes on Resilience, find us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, and would love for you to leave a review. Hey, Amy, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, Manya. It's such a pleasure and honor to be on your Notes of Resilience podcast.
Thank you. Now, before we get started and we get into the meat of the podcast, I would like to ask you a question. If you could have any superpower, what would that be?
That is a great question. I think about this a lot. Life is so stressful these days. I think the superpower I would pick would be to be invisible and unaware of all the stuff that's going on, just to sort of, maybe it would be like a mindfulness expert. I don't know, something that just allows you to just be in the joy of things and to tune everything else out.
Yes. I like that phrase, to be in the joy of things. There's a lot of value in that. And invisibility would be quite the skill. And we would have to, with great power comes great responsibility, because being invisible could be misused.
Yes, it would not be for spying or doing anything that had to do with the dark side of power. It would all be about being in joy.
Oh, nice. I love that. Oh, thank you for sharing that. So you and I today are talking about guilt, and specifically the guilt that survivors feel after experiencing some sort of trauma, whatever that may be. So just to get us started, I guess, what is guilt and what is its role in the life of somebody who is recovering from a tragedy?
Such an important question. I have thought about this a lot. I've gone through my own process with understanding what guilt meant to me, and I've done a little bit of research on it because I also have been fascinated by why it even exists. So When I think about guilt, I think about I've done something wrong, or somehow I'm bad, or I don't deserve. It has this negative connotation to me. And why in trauma or tragedy do we end up feeling guilty? I think what makes the most sense to me is that it has to do with helplessness, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned about that by talking with Galit Atlas, who is a psychoanalyst, psychologist, researcher. And I just felt like the way she talked about it resonated so deeply with me, is that feeling guilty is better than feeling helpless. And so sometimes guilt comes out of, there's an energy we can get
Mm-hmm.
to move and to problem solve. If I did something wrong or if I'm bad, I can fix that. If I'm
Mm-hmm.
helpless, I can't do anything.
Oh, that's so interesting. Speaking myself as a survivor, it was such a surprise to feel guilty, knowing full well I didn't do anything wrong. So, from your expertise and your experience, what role does the concept of resilience play in helping people overcome in the face of that guilt they're feeling after something happens?
Another great and important question. My goodness. So, guilt and resilience, I do think guilt can give us energy, right? And we can harness that energy to be searching, to resolve the feeling, to be looking for people to talk to help understand or change the way that we're feeling. So I think sometimes the energy that we can get from guilt will propel us into talking to people, listening, reading, understanding. And that, I think, is what the being resilient is, right? Resilience is what, how we're going through something, what we're accessing or using. So as long as the guilt's not immobilizing, it can actually help perpetuate our resilience.
Right. And I'm not sure if you even know the answer to this question, but under what circumstances would guilt be immobilizing? Or how is it that it's immobilizing for one person and maybe energizing for somebody else?
Yeah. So I do think the accumulation of traumatic experiences and or experiences in general that have taken from our internal resources
Mm-hmm.
has a factor in how much energy we can get to keep moving versus that immobilization. And I think people that become immobilized probably have past trauma, past mental health, past significant experiences that the newest victimization is a layer upon. And I do think that there's also quite a bit of research that supports that. The people that have the biggest struggles psychologically sometimes have histories of other trauma.
I'd love to take a slight detour and talk a little bit about your own experience. You are a counselor and you are a mental health professional. After your experience at the bombing, were some of these emotions, guilt in particular, but were some of these expected and you kind of knew it was going to happen, or was it all just a new experience for you?
I have been working in mental health for 31 years at this point in my life. So at the time of the bombing, just over 20.
Mhm.
And I was surprised at my emotional reaction to what happened. And I was fortunate in that I had the duality of having worked in victim services
Mhm.
and understand having the educational piece and having worked with a lot of people. And I was surprised at how little that helped me. I mean, I do think it helped because I would say, I know if somebody came to me and said this, this, and this, I would say, but even so, that guilt and the shame, I think, kept interfering.
Mhm.
And it's very insidious that emotional experience. And it really does take a lot of restructuring the way that you're thinking and education and learning about it to really exile it away.
Right. Okay. Oh, thank you for sharing that. I think as a survivor myself, without a particular professional or educational background in mental health, I remember thinking, oh, I bet someone who has mental health background, like totally easy for them to get through all this stuff. But early on, I was someone who didn't believe I had any resiliency. I had just learned the phrase and thought, oh, here are these other people who have it. I just don't have it. That's why I feel so horrible. So I think it was easy for me to assume that other people, for some reason, had it easier than I did.
I think that's common. Sadly, I think it's part of why so many survivors, so many of us get stuck in this phase of recovery because the guilt and the shame say I'm bad and something's wrong with me. And then we turn inward instead of outward towards people. And if you turn outward towards other people, they can tell us, they can help us understand that these feelings are normal or they had that too. But I think the guilt and the shame interferes in our process. And so we get quiet. And to your point, I think that's where loneliness comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And as survivors, I think many people, I know I did, feel very alone in this journey because in our minds, we look out and we're only looking at people through our own lens. So
Right.
we only see what we think we see. And, we compare other people's stories and experiences. They lost more than me. So, you know what? So, yeah, so I am weak or I'm vulnerable or I'm not resilient. And they are. Right. And there's probably people that have looked at you and said, oh, you're so resilient. Look at you. You're doing a podcast.
Right, right. Grass is always greener is perhaps, or we're comparing our insides to somebody else's outsides.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's the shame and the guilt that keep people quiet. Instead, right? We are judging ourselves and then we're afraid other people will judge us. So then we just turn in.
I said to somebody once, and it was true, that I felt absolutely alone and isolated from the moment the bomb went off. Like to me, it was just this individual experience and there were not people around me. I intellectually know that's not true. For so long, the feeling was, I'm just alone in this. And it's interesting to hear you talking about the role of guilt and shame and to start to see where maybe some of these thoughts and feelings were coming from.
I remember this had come up in my work. I've seen it in my work and it made sense in survivor circles that I've had the privilege of talking with people, survivors from all over the world. And when I think about shame and guilt in this fear of, somehow is my experience not enough or somehow is it not valid? And I think the quietness and the turning away is if I really turn and open up to people, will they tell me what I think? Will they tell me what I already fear, which is, oh, yeah, that's nothing. This person lost this or that person lost that. And then what would happen to me if that happened? So it's this, is it safer to hide or is it safer to share?
Mm-hmm.
And I think people almost always feel like once they share, why didn't I do that sooner?
Yes.
Right. Other people embrace you and accept you. And then you're like, that really is helpful because to your point, I mean, that aloneness is really in our mind. And I think I like the word annihilating. I think trauma can be annihilating. It shatters your sense of yourself and your sense of yourself in the world. Mm-hmm. So, now I'm alone in this. And sometimes we're protecting people. I don't want you to know what I know. I don't want you to know what I feel. I don't want you to think what I see what I saw.
Right.
So I think that I know that factor for me being a mother also was like, I need to be strong. I'm resilient. I got this. Like nothing bothers me. And then I had my little silo where I dealt with my stuff.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about that as a mother, protecting your children from this thing that you have experienced, which I can imagine, as you're saying, not wanting to share this with other people, not wanting to hurt other people, not wanting to be judged by other people. That would just add an extra layer of not wanting to share. And the truth is, and I would imagine your experience is similar, is that sometimes you do share it with somebody who does judge you and say something. And I think in my case, I experienced a few of those people early on, which is also what caused me to shut down, because I wasn't able, like I am now, to understand better where they're coming from and not care that they don't think my experience counted.
Right. So when we are fighting against that annihilation,
Mm-hmm.
right? When somebody says, communicates in some way, shape, or form, either ill-intended or intentional, right? They didn't intentional or not intentional, I should say.
Right.
It doesn't matter because it gets lost in the disorganization of the trauma, right? So in your mind, the fact that I'm feeling rejected or activated in this moment, I can't process clearly that maybe,
Mm-hmm.
oh, maybe she didn't, mean it like that, or maybe he wasn't saying that, but that's how you feel. So that's what happened, right? In
Right.
that moment. So it's really hard to sort of, how do I sort that out?
Yeah. So, how does community support help people who are dealing with guilt after a tragedy?
So I think community support offers so many so much buffering from mental health and protection from negative outcomes. I happen to be doing a lot of research on this right now, so I know this is true. But the better social support we have,
Mm-hmm.
fears are normalized, feelings are normalized. We hear I don't judge you, and then I think this about your story, so that helps me not judge myself, or somebody else didn't judge me, that helps me not judge myself. So I think we get that sense of not being alone.
Mm-hmm.
You have the sense of that validation, the people in your social support circle or peer support circle, and they're different. I'll just say that too, right? Social support and peer support are different, but both of them offering protection. Peer support would be like, you really understand what I went through. Social support would be, somebody's there for me. They're there to listen. They're there to not judge. They're there to foster my sense of resilience, right? So maybe to offer problem solving suggestions or to improve my sense that I can handle whatever I'm going through.
Mm-hmm.
And peer support would be like really identifying or sharing similar experiences and offering a non-judgment.
From my own experience, I can tell you they're both quite valuable in their own way. Peer support was particularly important for me because I was needing that validation and to hear other people's stories. So that was definitely quite important to me. Can you share some examples of like some specific coping mechanisms that are effective for people who are dealing with guilt?
So I think cognitive processing or cognitive reframing can be really helpful. So guilt might be, I'm weak, right? Like I feel bad that I have a need. So I might say to myself, like, oh, that's like I'm weak. So one of the coping skills would be, okay, I might be saying that to myself, but is that actually true? So like a intervention program or intervention strategy where I'm like, okay, is that actually true? Am I actually weak? Okay, I'm saying that to myself, but is it true? Okay, it's actually not true. So how can I still honor what I'm feeling, but give my mind something that's more accurate to think about? Okay, I don't like how I feel, I'm having these tough feelings and I'm, working on it.
Yes.
Or I do believe things will get better. Or, I'm being really harsh and judgmental on myself, right? So having some kind of cognitive reframing strategy, I think, is helpful.
Mhm.
I also think it's helpful to understand what the origin of it is. Talk to a professional. Talk to, counseling, therapy can be helpful. And even in the peer support circle, sometimes people can find that answer. So I think for me, when I learned about this helplessness, that made a lot of sense to me.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, that spoke to me. And that knowing that, having that insight helps me choose different language. So I still think you need the practical coping strategy of how am I going to talk to myself differently.
Mhm.
And as you know, when we're very overwhelmed sometimes or stuck in this emotional dark place, it's hard to change your thought. So then you need some kind of stress reduction strategy or a regulation strategy that allows you to calm our nervous system and shift our emotional state so we can talk to ourselves more.
Right. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So, how do cultural factors or society or sort of the who we are, whether it's our race or gender or status, how does that influence how we feel guilt and how we deal with guilt?
That's a really important question. So I think the cultural factors show up in how does that interfere with beliefs and values around are we strong versus weak, mental health care, asking for help, even if we are already vulnerable and we have other traumas layered on, what's that doing? I mean, I think there's a really deep conversation here about cultural and contextual factors that will dramatically impact the course of recovery. So, I mean, I'm coming from a place of privilege. So, for me, and I know that this contributed to my desire to further my education and expertise to do the work that I want to do, because I know with access to mental health care, I was able to have the benefit of exploring everything I wanted or needed to explore. So I also think accessibility is really important, and psychoeducation on the benefits is
Mhm.
really important. So building trust with people, providing psychoeducation, so that psychological first aid, building trust, making people feel safe, and then offering an introduction to what is possible and what's out there and trying to promote, in a trauma informed way, the best way we can. And then offering services that are culturally competent
Mhm.
and culturally appropriate for whoever needs them.
Thank you for sharing that. And I just want to acknowledge that I also come from a position of privilege, and I had health insurance and familiarity with the system and was able to get a lot of formal mental health treatment as to deal with this. And I know that not everybody was able to do that. And I did hear specifically some people lamenting the lack of services in languages other than English for people who were dealing with this. So thank you for sharing that piece of it. And we're getting close to the end and talked to you for like 5 hours about this topic. But to wrap us up, what advice do you have for friends or family who want to support someone who is, recovering from a tragedy, whether it's guilt they're feeling or another one of these complex emotions?
You and your heavy hitters today, all such really they're vital conversations. But family and friends, I would suggest getting your own support. I think sometimes family and friends struggle with survivors because there's either a frustration with the time it's taking for somebody to work through whatever it is that they're working through. I also think it's very hard to understand. And I think some kind of level of acceptance of I don't really understand and I'm still here to love you. I'll listen, I'll support you, and not to have to fix it. I mean, we both sort of talked about validation. So just to validate and recognize that I don't know what you're going through. It's something. I can see that it's doing something to you. I'm just here. I love you. I support you. How can I help?
Yeah.
I do think sometimes families and loved ones struggle supporting people. I think it's more than what they think. I think it's hard to understand. I think it can be frustrating. I think it can be annoying. I remember thinking if I say the word Boston Marathon one more time, people would be like, here she goes again, talking about the Boston Marathon. So it's just, I mean, we feel that, right? We can feel people being exasperated with either lack of and I think also family and friends, similar to this all these slogans, Boston Strong, family and friends just want you to be better.
Yeah.
So I also think it's hard for them to tolerate the distress and discomfort sometimes. So maybe that combination of like, I'm here to support you, and that encouragement if you need support or social support or peer support, find it. Let's find it for you.
Yeah. Thank you for that. There you go, everyone. That's how you deal with guilt after tragedy.
I know I just want to say, as we end this conversation, there's so much to talk about in terms of guilt and shame, and then survivor's guilt, which is different from guilt. I mean, it's complicated. I mean, it's definitely something, to continue a conversation about or read about, or,
yes,
not stop exploring what it means for you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing. And you're right. There's a lot more to dig into. We've got some more episodes in this series. We're going to dig into some other emotions. But before we go, Amy, can you tell us where can people find you or learn more about you?
Sure. I do have a website, amyconeal.com, and I maintain a professional Facebook page, which I mostly just repost things that speak to me or speak to, are reflective of things I've heard from other people. So I just put lots of stuff on there. And that's Amy C. O'Neill, MSLPC. Yeah. So that's where to find me.
Great. Well, I'll put links to those in the show notes so people can find you. And thank you so much for helping us dive deep into this particular emotion today.
Yeah. Thank you for hosting a tough conversation.
Thank you for listening. I hope you got as much out of this conversation as I did. So if you'd like to learn more about me, Manya Chilinsky, I work with organizations to help understand how to create environments where people can thrive after difficult life experiences. And I do this through talks and consulting. I'm a survivor of mass violence, and I use my experience to help leaders learn about resiliency, compassion, and trauma-sensitive leadership, to build strategies to enable teams to thrive and be engaged amidst difficulty and turmoil. If this is something you want to learn more about, visit my website, www.manyachilinsky.com, or email me at manya@manyachilinsky, or stop by my social media on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks so much.